Okay, so we're going to look at the part C for component 1, section A as well. And this is a 10-mark question. Explore how the convention you have identified is used in one scene in your chosen film. So we'll focus on Rebel, and actually the example answer you've got is from Rebel as well. In your answer, refer to at least one key element one key element used, for example, cinematography, mise-en-scene, editing, or sound. So actually here, you're quite likely to get a question that focuses on one scene of your choice. And it could be a focus on cinematography or mise-en-scene. It could be a focus on genre convention. But what's really important is that the convention that you've already identified earlier on is that you are using in this. Now, this student here, we've already looked at their answer. This student here was focusing on the convention of Jim being used as a rebellious outsider. So they have taken that convention, they've chosen a scene from the film, and then they're going to refer to how key elements have been used to show that convention. So if you look in the ready boxes on the side, obviously you've got the title, How to Approach Component 1, Section A, Question 1, Part C. Underneath that, you've got key criteria. Now, I haven't put up the whole exam criteria up here because actually I think it's quite tricky to look at in an online format, but I've picked out the main key criteria and I'm going to show you where the student has used it in their work. And then you are also going to have a go at thinking about Jim being rebellious, the rebellious outsider, and we're going to look at a different scene for you to have a go at your own answers, so you're getting quite a lot of support. Now, this student's exemplar answer, they actually got 10 out of 10. And I know not all of you are going for grade 8 and grade 9, but I think it's really important to see effectively a perfect answer so you can steal as many wonderful ideas as you can from it. So the first thing you have to do, if you look in the key criteria box, is clear reference to scene being used. And this student, if you look at his very first sentence in his answer, makes a clear reference to the scene he's using. I'm going to talk about the scene where Jim is telling his parents that he is going to go to the police and explain his role in the car crash. It's really important that you tell the examiner what scene you're talking about, because if you don't put it into the context of the scene, it makes it a lot trickier to work out whether the things you're talking about are accurate or not. We also need to go back to our key criteria. The second point, a clear explanation of the convention shown. So in this case, it's one from part A. So the student in his second sentence says, we see Jim as the rebellious outsider and someone who does not respect the authority of his parents. So they're going back to the genre convention there. Brief outline of the events in the scene. We want ideally 5 or 6 ways. Now in the question, they ask for at least one, but that's for kind of like a minimum mark. Like, so to get any marks, you have to have talked about a key element. We don't want a few marks, we want lots of marks. So we're going to talk about 5 or 6 clear ways in which mise-en-scene is used to show the convention. I've put mise-en-scene there just to save my own space, but it could have been cinematography, it could have been editing, could have been sound. You've got to show a use of film terminology, and you have to show knowledge and understanding of convention, the scene, and mise-en-scene or cinematography, whichever thing you chose to write about. So I'm going to just read through the whole answer, and I'm just going to note through to you where we see this key criteria. So I'm going to talk about the scene where Jim is telling his parents he's going to go to the police and explain his role in the car crash. Reference to the scene being used, tick. We see Jim as the rebellious outsider and someone who does not respect the authority of his parents. Rebellious outsider, clear reference to the convention he'd already mentioned in part A. Tick, good. In this scene, he is fed up with his parents, and despite his pleadings, they refuse to support his decision to go to the police. Jim and his parents fight, and the scene comes to a head when Jim attacks his father. Brief outline of the events, tick. So out of those 6 bullet points in the key criteria, this student's ticked off 3 already. Jim is seen as the rebellious outsider in many ways in this scene, and the use of cinematography is key in showing his role as a rebel and someone who is not conforming. The scene features very low-key lighting, good, clear way, and the scene itself features drab and dark colours as part of the furniture and overall style of the house. Jim's parents are both wearing dressing gowns which almost match this style and colour, making them seem drab and dull and almost part of the furniture. They look dull and muted, meaning that the audience sees them as very dull and muted people. Now, I know that he's been asked about Jim, But because the student's talking about the conflict between Jim and his father, Jim rebelling against his father, actually for this student it's really important that he talked about how the parents were presented, because he's going to contrast this. And now he goes into, in contrast, Jim wears a bright red jacket. We've talked a lot about the colour red, making him stand out and seem at odds with his parents. And now he's really talking about the use of cinematography, mise en scene, and how it's showing that rebellious outsider. He looks very different to them. In the time of the film, men would be expected to wear clothing not too dissimilar from their father, but Jim, as an outsider and a rebel, does not conform with the expectations of society. Wears clothes that he feels makes him seem more interesting and individual. So this student is really focusing on this idea of Jim being a rebellious outsider and what the director's done. So he's made the colours on Jim different. He's made the lighting on the other characters sort of really drab and dreary, and the colours used on Jim really bright and cheerful. The colour of Jim's jacket is also interesting as it represents danger and blood. His temper and involvement in violence is reinforced through the choice of colour here, making him clearly a rebellious outsider. Good, lots of developing the idea of the jacket. Finally, his positioning is always at odds with his parents. He's always looming over or pointing at his parents. And actually, I know they got 10 out of 10, so great. But actually, they could have talked about the idea of like the camera angle being positioned to show Jim looming over at times as well. Teenagers, especially during this period, would be expected to be much more respectful and obedient to their parents, and the use of the performance here allows Jim to be seen clearly as someone who does not respect authority and the will of his parents, making him a rebellious outsider. Now, all of you have come up with points very similar to that. So he shows knowledge and understanding of the character, the convention. He's got excellent knowledge of the film, and he's used his terminology. He talks about lighting, he talks about cinematography, he talks about the use of colour, and actually he's got really good knowledge. He shows his contextual awareness as well. So that is a top answer. So on the next slide, I've put a link to a different scene with Jim, one that you're all probably a little bit more familiar with, the one at the start where he's drunk and his mum and dad have been out at a party and they come and pick him up from the police station. And I want you to do the same thing as the student. So I want you to think about how Jim is presented as a rebellious outsider, but focusing on a different scene. So you can use this answer to support you. You can even use some of this student's sentences as sentence starters to support you. So you could start with, I am going to talk about the scene where we see Jim as the rebellious outsider in this scene. So actually the first few sentences in the student's answer, you can use them as sentence starters. You're not going to be able to copy and paste it clearly because it's a different scene. So you need to make sure what you're saying is focusing on the scene on the next page as well. Okay, good luck. Off you go.